Welcome to Deal Nation, where we tap into Launch Control's nationwide network to find out what's bringing in deals and how we can all work together to build generational wealth. We're joined today by Ian Ross, the host of the Close More Sales podcast and a very experienced sales trainer who works directly with Steve Trang at Real Estate Disruptors. Ian, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Michael?
Yeah, doing great. Happy to have you on. I know that really dialing in sales processes and being able to move deals through the funnel is super important to our listener base. And you guys are the absolute pros at how to dial these things in. So really excited to have you on the show.
I'm happy to be here. Yeah, it's interesting because so many people in real estate want to focus on all the other things around getting deals. Because it's often easier to spend time in the information about how to run numbers and how to network. That's a lot easier than having the tough conversations over and over and over again and getting experience of moving someone through a sales process when they are a motivated seller. And so people often delay the process of learning how to do, in our opinion, the most important thing, which is have the conversation about buying someone's house at a number that makes sense for you as an investor.
Yeah, it's we do text engagement and we're sending out a couple thousand messages to try to tee up, say, 20 to 50 discovery calls. And so those 20 to 50 discovery calls, I think we had Steve on the other day, and he said, look, you're never going to close 100%. No one ever closes 100%. No one closes 50%, but that's a good goal to aim for, right?
Yeah.
And you can quickly do the math on what the average deal size is nationwide. You do math on what 20 of the 50 would get you, and wow, I'd be super well off. That would be an amazing financial achievement. And then the pressure's on, right? So you're on this call where you know what the financial implications are. It's hard to take a deep breath. It's you need the training to get there.
That's true. I would also say, though, it should also be freeing in a way, knowing that you cannot close 100% of people. Meaning,
Yeah.
statistically, inevitably, some of the people you are having a conversation with will not make sense for you. And that is okay. That's part of the process. So I always want to encourage people to be freed up from feeling like they need every single deal and every single line has to be perfect, or they have no chance of making any money in real estate, because the reality is inevitably some people won't go through, which means that's okay. It's okay if I mess this up. That could have been one of the percentages of people that never would have gone with me anyway. I just got to be consistent and keep running a process so that I can get the 20, 25 people out of 50.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's quickly talk about how you got involved in REI. The majority of our listener base, they read Rich Dad Poor Dad, went, holy, I don't have to do this 9 to 5 thing anymore. I'm going to get into real estate investment and make my own fortune. But you had a bit of a different path in. So how'd you get involved?
Completely different path. Yeah. So you're right. Like, we've noticed that on the Real Estate Disruptors podcast too. The two things that every single person who's worthy of getting on the Disruptors podcast is that they've all read Rich Dad Poor Dad and they've all paid for coaching or a mastermind. That's the one thing that's across the board. So my path into real estate was completely different. For me, I was a successful salesperson. I started in insurance. That was my first commission-only role. I was doing sales roles before then, but it wasn't paid entirely in commission. Then I transitioned to solar, which is when I got really good and had really, really good numbers and started making the type of money where suddenly I wasn't worried what my I literally remember the moment when I took my fiance at the time, or maybe she was just my girlfriend even at the time, to go just out for ice cream, and I had made enough money that I wasn't even worried about anything she bought in terms of the ice cream. It's I'm finally okay enough that there's nothing she can buy here in terms of ice cream where I have to be boy, I wish she'd gotten the smaller one. I never had any of that concern. That only happened when I got into solar, and then it was exponential from there. After solar, I got into a tech sales job as an account executive, and one of the things I realized there at that company, since it was a stealth startup, they were buying a lot of real estate for what they were doing. And because it was a stealth startup, we weren't allowed to tell people what we were doing. They had a policy, which is they'd be very open internally about how everything worked at that company if they hired you, because you're not allowed to say, I worked at this company, and since it was in stealth mode. And so I got to learn a lot about business. And while I was doing that, I wanted to start essentially my own sales company. And I was thinking, okay, what is it that I can sell where I can have conversations with people who can make decisions? So not a B2B type approach. I'm talking to someone who theoretically could be the decision maker right then and there, which is what I was familiar with and what I got good at in terms of solar. And there could also be huge upside in the sale, so that like one individual sale could be six figures kind of thing, instead of just eking out small percentages here and there. And so that's why I got into real estate wholesaling. It was truly for the active income. My approach to business has always been in pursuit of very high active income, which is different than most people in real estate, but it's something that excites me. I like work. I love sales. I love having conversations and the strategies and tactics around effective conversations to get people to make decisions. And so I started a virtual wholesaling company entirely focused on running my own sales company. And it was through extension of that I got hooked up with Steve Trang. And I'd come out to an event, and he was one of the things I love about Steve and everything that we do at Disruptors is he's so transparent about how everything works. I mean, incredibly open and honest about everything. So many people in the space play their cards pretty close to their chest because they're afraid to reveal if something's not working, what the numbers are. They want to sort of keep this guru aura about them. And that could not be further from the truth with Steve Trang. And so something that stood out to me was he showed the numbers his cold callers, and they were outsourced, but what they were getting in terms of leads for his company over the course of a month. They were getting per caller about 7 leads a month. And I was scratching my head because I had hired cold callers without real estate experience who I had trained, because I'd had experience training insurance agents and stuff like that and writing scripts for the tech company I was selling for. And I realized I was getting 7 a day and he was getting 7 a month. And so I was like, I couldn't, like, what's going on here? And while I was at the event, I started talking to Steve, and I found out I'm quite good at training people with not a lot of experience, and I've gotten better at training people with more experience to get good at having conversations strategically with an outcome. So I wasn't qualifying as intensely as Steve's were. Realistically, mine were probably about 2 to 3 a day. It's still a pretty big difference to 7 a month. So that was like when I started hooking up with Steve and starting to figure out, all right, maybe there's something to this in terms of me linking up with you and bringing my sort of sales expertise to what you're doing. But I got into real estate for the active income, not for the passive income.
Yeah, it's interesting that, I completely agree about Steve. I think that his transparency and just willingness to help people along the way in real estate investment is why he's, one of, if not the most trusted voice in the space,
Yeah.
But I think he also knows that just saying it once, he gave great advice here on Deal Nation, right? But just saying it once and having someone listen is not the same as working with someone like you and actually going through the training. We had the other day, we had Clifford the Cowboy Walker on, and he was talking about when he got started, he was driving a truck across West Texas, and he got lists off of like PropStream or whatever, and he was just calling like 1,000 people, practicing. He said, I didn't care if I got a deal. I wanted to practice what I was saying. I wanted to practice engaging with homeowners because I knew that once I was really ready to dive in fully, I needed to have that part dialed in. And so there's that do-it-yourself version, which still requires repetition, literally in the hundreds, to get it right, or the slightly faster version of working with an experienced coach that can course correct you along the way and help you get to that space faster.
That is so true. If you read Rich Dad Poor Dad is the perfect example. You could read Rich Dad Poor Dad. You could read a book on how to invest like Warren Buffett, how to buy multifamily like Cardone Capital. You can do whatever you want. But if you just close that book and go, man, that was really insightful, and you don't take action on it, it was simply entertainment. It wasn't education. The
Yeah.
education, the learning has to come from the doing. And the best way to learn is not simply, in our opinion, is not simply to read the information and then go do it. It's to learn the information and then continually get feedback as you implement it, so that you can be course corrected along the way. Steve, when we have a marketing mentor now, because we're salespeople, we're not marketers. We're still learning about marketing, but
Yeah.
we've got a marketing mentor. Steve pays for a like a kung fu coach. I have a running coach to help me with run ultra marathons. Like, we're big believers in using other people's expertise to get guidance as you are continually learning. Sales training to us is not something you did, it's something you do. It's something you have to constantly practice at and hone your skills, because Steve's been in business long enough. There's multiple people, I mean, truly dozens of people by now, even just over the last year and a half, who've come back now that interest rates have adjusted and the market's changing in a way. They're trying a different strategy where they're saying, yeah, I went through the training, I got all these results, and then I realized after time that suddenly my results weren't there anymore because they were falling into old habits. They weren't getting constantly critiqued and getting feedback on how to improve. And then suddenly they realize it's a year later and their process doesn't look anything like what they got trained on. They're making mistakes they never would have made before. They're saying words and phrases that put homeowners' guards up that they knew not to do before. And so we're just big believers in continually to get feedback as you learn, to not just do it faster, but to do it more effectively.
Yeah, in marketing, there's never a single answer. Right? The idea with marketing is
So true.
always to do iterative testing to see what's landing with which demographic and why. Right? So what you might test out with your text engagement in the beginning in using launch control, you might have some messaging that works really well in like the South Florida area for out of state landlords. And you stick with that because it works really well. But then the interest rates change, and the value that buyers can get when they sell the house changes, and some of those out of state landlords are also fix and flippers, and so maybe their finances are a little different than it was 6 7 months ago. You've got all of these different variables that are in play, but you're still using that same message that worked 8 months ago. It's not necessarily going to work. You're probably going to have to adjust your text strategy to equal what's going on in their lives now, or just what is situationally with the economy, what's working now. And so you always have to iterate, you always have to change, and the same is true for sales, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'd say it's amplified with marketing, because when you are using text and stuff and you're getting in front of as many people as possible to see who raises their hand to respond to that marketing message, you lose some of the nuances of tonality in conversation, of asking a question that gets them to respond. And so how different your marketing is compared to a competitor is amplified in importance, because you lose that interactive element and you lose some of the nuances of your own voice and tonality in terms of how you ask questions. So marketing is kind of like, you get it to work and then it works really well until it doesn't, and you need to make adjustments there. It's always like that is generally the pattern.
Yeah.
In sales, there are aspects of things that won't work if you are truly focused on memorizing certain lines. If your approach is like, let me memorize this line that works, once that line is overused, what happens is people feel this is a sales line. And then kind of we call it like showing the seams of the sale, like they can see up your sleeve as the magician. It's like, oh, I can just tell you're doing a trick now. And then the
Yeah.
rapport is just completely lost. And that's why we're big believers in a framework rather than simply a script, because the script, then you're forcing something that doesn't need to be as highly focused as marketing into that process where it's really good until people have heard it. And then once they've heard it, it runs out of effectiveness, and then you need to change things. If you can follow a framework that's moving someone through an emotional trajectory that has variables in what you say that will never be exactly the same because it's based on what they had said to you is important. You no longer have that risk of like, oh, this tactic doesn't work anymore because you're not relying on this exact line and tactic. You're simply moving someone through an emotional process to see if you can help them in buying their home. And that end result is a very different experience for homeowners and for the salespeople having those conversations.
Yeah, and that awareness of emotional context and that awareness of nuance and the necessity to kind of pivot depending on what you're hearing is something that is every successful investor brings that up. Every successful coach in the REI business brings that up. And we would really love to see at Launch Control, we'd really love to see some of that emotional context and awareness being brought to an earlier point in the stage and being brought to marketing, because the text that you send is the first foray into a conversation, right? And oftentimes what happens is people have this overly scripted approach being via marketing, exactly what you're saying in the sales process, where no matter how clever it was, even if it did, and you said ask a question that gets a response, hugely important in text. If you can ask a question that gets a response, they get into the inbox and you have full engagement capabilities, right? But if it's the same question over and over and over again, and people in a given area are hearing that same question from multiple investors, it becomes white noise, right? So
Yeah.
you can't necessarily rely on the scripting. But if you have a situation where everybody's sending a text message that basically says like, hey, I pay cash, interested? And then they get on the phone and say, listen, I understand life can come at you sometimes. What, all of a sudden they're charming, all of a sudden they're full of empathy, but their text was very like, hey buddy, right? So it creates a disconnect, right? So
Yeah. A mismatch in marketing and the sales process causes so many people so many issues. Because I know that there are also some people who just flat out outsource every aspect of their market. Let me just pay someone to do this marketing. And then the way the messaging in marketing comes from what maybe gets someone to respond to the initial conversation, which is what that marketing, that outsourced company is getting paid for, rather than the actual result of getting them across the line and getting a contract and then getting that contract to the finish line. That there can often be a mismatch. So like the biggest thing I see is that most people who focus on marketing messaging always are talking about, would you like a cash offer on your home? There's some
mhm.
version of, are you interested in hearing a cash offer? And we don't do that, because if we start that way, now we're orienting our process. Someone's responding to wanting to hear a cash offer. And our process is, we don't make offers on homes. We're here to buy homes. And if we can, we'd love to have the conversation if we can buy yours. But if you're not interested, the last thing I want to do is waste your time. I'm just open to hearing a little bit more about your home and your situation to see if we will be the right fit for you. And if we're not, no harm, no foul. That's totally okay. And that approach is, first off, it differentiates us. It's refreshing for the homeowner. And when we actually have the conversation, we buy at far steeper margins than people who are simply presenting their offer and become a commodity compared to every other investor in the space. So we don't
So
give up our competitive advantage by just, here's our number, here's our offer. Instead, we try and figure out if people are even interested in having the conversation about selling their home and move on from there.
yeah, so I love that approach. Approach of basically of self elimination, right? Where they go, I can't go down that route. What else can you do? I can't go down that route. How else can you help me? And you end up guiding them to exactly the place that you want them to be. But I can hear the but from the listening audience right now, and so I'm gonna give you that rebuttal and see what you think.
Give them.
So the rebuttal from a good portion of the audience will be, I'm just building up my REI business. Wholesale is the only opportunity that I have. I can't wholesale. I can't hold it and rent it. I don't understand subject to or haven't learned it yet. I have light realtor contacts. Like I'm in this to wholesale and get assignment fees. So how does that apply to me?
So the approach I just gave you is what we do for wholesale. I mean, we prefer cash and then wholesale every time. But the experience of the homeowner is that I'm just trying to have a conversation to see if I can be the type of person who can buy your home or not. And if I can't, if it doesn't work for the numbers, that's totally fine. But what's so important is remembering, it's almost like if you think about Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs always talked about the real goal of designing software or product is the end user experience in mind. It's not, here's the software, what can we do with this software for the end user? His thought process is, what's it going to be like for the end user? Okay, how can this software fit that criteria? And so for us, it's, what is the experience going to be of the homeowner based on how they engage with our marketing and how they have a sales conversation with us? And then we fit the wholesale to that experience. So it's not, I have the same approach, whether I'm going to try and do seller finance or whether I'm going to try and buy it at 50 cents on the dollar and wholesale it. It's simply following a best practice and having a conversation where the homeowner doesn't feel pressured, and I'm just learning what's unique to them. And if the numbers work, they work. And if not, there's no way I'm going to be able to help you. I'd love to set a time to chat in a few months if you can't get this problem solved. But right now, I don't even know if the numbers are going to work. And we just have that approach regardless. Yeah.
Yeah, you're front loading their need rather than your want or your own limitations. Because if you're front loading your own limitations,
I want. Yeah. It's never about what we can do. It's always about what you have. And if what you have and what you want is something we can do, we can have a conversation about how we can fit that. And if not, best of luck.
Yeah, exactly. I had and you can expand on this, but really that applies often to sales in any industry. Like I hired a salesperson once, and I loved this line that they told me. It said, when I first started my sales career, I wasn't any good at sales. All I did was roll the ball across the floor. I like, oh look, I have this ball. Look what color it is. It can roll. Instead of saying, like, finding out if the person on the other side was interested in if they were a playful person, if they were interested in the outdoors, if they were interested in anything that a ball might actually fit their life, they were just like, here's the ball, right? And so a lot of people in REI getting started, they do that. They roll the ball across the floor and they're like, hey, I can give you a cash offer. Here's what I basically front loading. Here's what I need. Are you interested in helping me? Rather than the other way around of how can I help you?
Yeah. And in fact, again, our goal is to buy at steep enough discount that we could even buy cash, forget even wholesale. Like that's always the goal. But the way we start it is basically the same, regardless of what the numbers are for them, what they say they want, because I want them to verbalize what is important to their timeline, their needs, their wants, their desires, their hesitations. As long as they can verbalize what's important, theoretically, as long as the numbers end up working, which they would end up working regardless of how I go about it, but now they're going to be more inclined to listen to me. It's the idea of, like, if you went into a doctor's office and you say, like, yeah, my knee hurts. And he goes, great, we got to amputate. You're like, whoa, what are you talking about? What do you mean you got to amputate? It's like, yeah, here's the amputation. Well, let's go ahead. We'll schedule it for tomorrow. They might even cut off the wrong leg. They have no idea what's important to me. But if someone comes in and goes, my knee hurts, which is just a motivated homeowner in this case, and I go, okay, how long has that been going on for? Does it hurt when you do this? Does it hurt when you do that? Okay, let's put you through an MRI and start eliminating. I saw some things I'm not too happy about. We need to run some tests. And if I can learn about what's important to you and build trust as the expert asking questions, not assuming as a surgeon, my end goal is to amputate your leg and let me start pushing you through that process. But then I realize, you've had this. Oh my gosh, you've got type 2 diabetes. Like this is gonna spread to other parts of your body. We need to amputate right now, or I'm worried it could go up. I mean, the choice is up to you. But if you want to risk your heart, that's entirely up to you. But if we can cut it off now, we can at least save the rest of you. What do you feel like you want to do? That type of approach is how people raise their hand saying, please buy my home at a discount, rather than going, can I amputate your leg? It's like, it's a completely different experience for the homeowner, who is the person who has to make the decision.
Yeah. Can you repeat that last line that you said, like, what do you want to do, or how do you want to proceed? You said something on.
Yeah, that's how almost all my closing lines are versions of that. My favorite closing line usually always has some aspect of variables in it based on things they had said that are important to them. So let's just say they've said to me, yeah, they've revealed their pain, they revealed their motivation, they've told me where they want to go, what they want to do, what their situation is. the way I would say it would be something like, okay, if we can make sure we're buying this home inside of 30 days, so you don't have to worry about that. We're going to get you out of this house so you don't have to worry about those stairs anymore, and you don't have to worry about your wife falling down them and the implications of that. 3, this is just a hands-off experience, so you're just picking up a check inside of those 30 days so you can move on to that retirement community, actually being close to your grandkids. If we can do all of that, how should we prioritize this?
Right. And it's the tone that I
Still
was
matters.
kind of referring to, right? Where you're
Yeah.
saying, if we can do all that, how do you
Yeah.
want to proceed? What do you want to
If
do?
if we can
Because
do this, do you feel like that would be helpful?
yeah, and it's that kind of hearing some honesty in your voice, hearing some transparency in your voice. That's really important because and it goes into the problematic nature of scripting because
Yeah.
I've definitely heard sales calls in REI where there's that like sense of kind of robotic recall and then asking like a rote question. So it'll be something like, so Ian, what I'm hearing is that you need solutions because you inherited this house from your grandmother. So what's it going to take to get you where you need to be? And it's like this like very like robotic, like I heard what you
Yeah.
said, and then the repeat like phrase question instead of like and it's a tough thing you're going through. I know that getting this house from your grandmother doesn't sound like it's really fitting your life right now. Don't want to stick you with any solutions that you don't want or need. But which of the paths we discussed makes the most sense for you right now, right? Like having that kind of like empathetic response as opposed to what's it going to take to get you where you need to be over and over and over again is most likely going to be more effective.
What's it gonna take sounds like, "What's it gonna take to get you in this Toyota today?" Let's like, let's avoid
Totally.
anything that triggers people to think like they've walked onto a car lot. And
Right.
part of that is because a lot of people coming into the acquisition side of real estate came from car sales, so that can happen. So
Yeah.
they were trained to be pushy, to be forceful, to screw people over, frankly, because that's where the money's made. And the reality is like that's just not the way, outside of really just a car lot, how to get people to make decisions. Not in the way in real estate, not in any aspect of B2B or B2C, whether you're talking to an investor, a landlord, or a little lady who just wants to downsize. You want to give them the sensation that they are heard, they are understood, they are listened to, and they get to make the decision rather than feeling forced into it by some logic trap. Wouldn't you agree? Yes or no? No, thank you. You can kindly see the door. But if I go, do you feel like this is a priority to fix right now? It's entirely up to you. The sensation is they raise their hand, which also means even if you could bully someone into signing a contract, so many of those people might get his contract signed if they're in the home or forcing someone on the phone right there. That person's not showing up to closing day. They stop answering the phone. They feel pressured. Suddenly, like a lawyer calls your company and it's a whole challenge. We avoid that entirely by getting them to feel like they made this decision. And we buy at steeper margins because of that and have far fewer cancellations and sort of seller's remorse.
So I think that in the course of sales and really any industry, and correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but I definitely think it applies to REI. Is people tend to think either they know nothing about sales and they need help, or they know everything about sales and don't need help. And it's rarely like an in between kind of space. So uh, with launch control, when people come in to launch control, we want to get them. But there's a phrase in SaaS of like app adoption, right? We'd love to get to 100% adoption. But like we were saying with sales, you're never going to get to 100% adoption. We're never going to have somebody who knows the app and uses it as well as I would, having
Right.
been exposed to it since 2019, right? But if we can get them up to 70%, 80% adoption, then we know that they'll stick with the app, they'll get a bunch of money out of using it, and it'll become foundational kind of for their business, right? So when people walk through the door and they work with Close More Sales, what's their adoption level in terms of sales processes? Are they at 20%? Are they at 80%? Is it a big mix?
It's definitely a mix because we're catering to like whole sales teams sometimes where the team is told you now do things this way. And so it's a lot easier to get adoption. So we actually have far more success when a business owner hires their team, because now the salespeople feel forced into doing it, and then they get the results, and that reinforces it. And that, like, there's that level there. When we have someone starting from absolute scratch, we have a pretty good level of adoption because they don't have any bad habits to unlearn. But you're right. I mean, one of our biggest challenges by far is that by the very nature of who we are usually trying to sell sales training to, we're selling to people who don't think they have a problem, which is, look at any marketing thing. That's not who you want to sell to. You don't want to be selling to people who don't think they have a problem, right? Like, it's the old joke of like, what's the best location for like a hot dog stand? Do I want to set up on the beach? Do I want to be downtown where foot traffic is? You want to be wherever there are starving customers, right? If people are starving, they'll buy your hot dogs. It's very hard to sell salespeople, especially professional salespeople, which is who I like to train, on sales training, because they already think they're good. So the simple answer is we don't have this mastered yet. For the people who are bought in and do have success, it ends up starting to be probably in the sort of 50 to 70%, like making some changes. And part of that is because I'm okay if they don't do 100%, because not everyone talks like me. Not everyone thinks like me. Not everyone is as good as tonality as me. It sounds sort of self-serving, but it's simply true. Like, you even noticed it with me just riffing off the top of my head, let alone after an hour in someone's home. And so as long as they are comfortable doing as much of the stuff we train as possible, they have a better chance of success if they're operating from a place where they feel like it fits their personality and they feel comfortable doing it. So I'm more than happy to like let people do a thing that's different from how we train, as long as it's hitting the right emotional points and they are comfortable doing it consistently. Because the consistent approach will always have better success than if you don't believe it's going to work, or you're not comfortable doing it and you do it 100% to the T. So it really varies depending on who we're training.
Before we came on today, we were talking about kind of like the full cycle sales process, and a lot of the work, I understand, probably the majority of the work goes into seller conversations, because that's probably the hardest barrier, and probably the place where you really need to understand and learn the most like emotional relevance to that conversation. But those are B2C conversations, if you really break it down, right? Whereas when you get into the dispo side of things, you're having a B2B conversation, right? Where you both are quite aware that there's a profit structure here, and you're both going to get a piece of that pie, and all you're doing is really grappling over how big of a piece each of you is going to get in order to come out to fairness. So in a seller conversation, you're not trying to win, like you're going to get a win out of it, but you're not trying to win. Whereas in a B2B conversation, it's kind of known that it's a tug of war, right? So how are you coaching people on that dispo side of sales as well?
Yeah. So,
and did what I just say is it complete nonsense in the way that you guys approach dispo sales?
No, it's not complete nonsense. The only differentiation is that we definitely do our very best when training like actual organization. It's different if we're training a solo operator, which some of the people listening, like, you're probably better served by getting someone who just can theoretically buy your deal every single time. The problem with that is those people are professional negotiators to an extent.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be harder to eke out as much profit as otherwise. If you're operating within a company, or now you've got a few people and you've got enough like deal flow and enough capital that you have some flexibility, how we train is a little bit different, because we're in pursuit of people who are doing their first or second flip if we can. If you have watched Flip or Flop and you're like, I want to get into real estate, you're our ideal dispo person, because that is actually far closer to the B2C approach, because we're talking about like, hey, like, why are you even, like, what are you looking for in a house anyway? Why are you even doing this? and it's like, oh man, I saw this and I want to make this money. Okay, if this property has these criteria, is this something you even want to take a swing at? It's much more along the lines of a B2C approach. So again, the variation depends on the company and who we're training, because if you are less experienced, you're going to want the quicker turnaround, in which case now you have to be willing to take a little less profit for the certainty of moving the deal. And if you have a bigger organization and you've got more than one person in dispo, now it's a different approach. Now you're trying to get the newer buyer, the less experienced investor, simply than handing off to the most seasoned flipper, because you'll be making less on each deal. But you're right. Like, however, the big thing that we still have a whole script and process, and the script is really just to illustrate a process on having conversations with people in dispo, with investors to set them up. So one of the things we really want to do is still highlight the similar sort of emotional trajectory of a sales conversation that we would have with a homeowner. There's just more emphasis on the gain aspect. So our ideal flow of a sales conversation is gain to pain to pen. If you're talking, so that's motivation can usually be classified as either gain or pain or avoidance of pain. And so there's always going to be more pain for someone who got a notice in the mail from the bank than an investor who's buying their 18th flip of the year. Right. However, you can still stoke the right type of emotion, which is loss, fear of loss, with an investor who's a seasoned negotiator, if we start talking about the gain and then take it away. So it might be something like, okay, if this house fits that criteria, do you feel like this is one of the things you would want to buy? Or maybe you've got your eyes on something else entirely. Like, well, no, if it does that, I'd be interested in it. I just don't know about the numbers. Okay, had you seen other homes like this in the area, or does this seem like if you miss on this, it wouldn't matter? And we're trying to stoke out the yeah, no, it's true. I don't want to miss this opportunity. It's harder. It requires more nuance and more practice, but we can still build up the gain and then take it away. And so the pain point is not the avoidance of whatever's going on with the house like it would be for the homeowner. It's simply in losing the gain, losing the profit, losing what the profit they could then do into another deal by taking away with the investor. So we train on that for sure.
No, I love that. When you're talking to sellers, right? With text in particular, you want to segment your sellers so that you know who you're talking to, right? Sure. Like the text message that you send to somebody who's over 65, high equity, living in South Florida and retired, and somebody who's under 30 in pre-foreclosure, living in Denver. It's a different conversation, right? Yeah. And so you want to start off on the right foot. But the same is true on the dispo side. And we always really encourage people to use launch control on the dispo side of things, but with the same mentality in mind, right? So if you've got, like, you brought up like an ideal kind of avatar would be somebody who's just getting into the dispo side. Right. And those people are often, they're going to be more willing to eat it a little bit because they're just getting into it. Like, I think the smartest play, anybody who's watching Chip and Joanne or whatever and wants to get into fix and flip, if they've got the cash, the smartest thing that they could do would be to contact a bunch of wholesalers in their area and just set up feeder systems, right? Where the wholesalers are coming to them and saying like, I've got this. Now, you're going to pay a little bit of a margin, but you're working your other job. Somebody's finding the properties for you, and all you have to do is say yes or no. So it's a beneficial B2B relationship. Whereas if you're that person who's on their 18th flip of the year, you're looking for margins, right? And you're going to fight for it. So if you're able to set up these buyer communities via text, and you can set up tags in launch control and say, tag it Chip and Joanne, negotiator, and you get any property, you can ping both of them, right? And like when you're pinging your negotiator group of like 5 or 6 negotiators, what conversation you're going to have with them about that property. And it's that, like take it away kind of principle to bring them back. You can apply that, right? And then you can have a whole different approach that people learn through CloseMoreSales with the Chip and Joanne types, so that you're able to have an A/B option for any property that you have. And what gives you better margins? Is the negotiator giving you better margins? is the Chip and Joanne crew giving you better margins? And you choose what to do with that property, right? It gives you more choice, but you're doing it by understanding who you're talking to, even on the dispo side.
That's the power of if you actually utilize tags appropriately in software like launch control,
Uh-huh.
is that because everything that we teach in general is making sure that your messaging is tailored to the individual. Because what works, like you just said, what works for one group here does not work for another group there. And so if you can tag things appropriately by using launch control that way, you can be effective at scale over text. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there's so many people who are listening to this who probably use launch control who are actually realize they're not utilizing just even that feature appropriately. You should
Yeah.
definitely segment your audiences as best you can and then adjust messaging for it. It gives you we're always in pursuit of best practice, and that is for sure a best practice approach to make sure the right audience is hearing the right message.
Yeah, I had a conversation. I was working with one of our subscribers recently, and I got absolutely geeked when I saw this. They had this map of their market where it was all color coordinated or color coded, I should say. And they broke down in each one of those. They knew exactly how many wholesale deals had been done in like the last 18 months. They knew what the price points were. They knew like everything that they could need to know about the dispo model basically for in that market. They already knew. And so they knew what was selling where. And then they were going out and matching data to that so that they could go out and reach out to sellers knowing what they'd be able to sell in those markets. And I was just, advanced usage. But when you have that, then the conversation for me becomes really easy, right? Then the conversation goes, okay, well, let's take this data type, which you're going to use in this buyer's market, and here's the conversation we want to have on that channel. Then let's take this data segment. Here's the conversation we want to have on that channel. And so it makes it really easy for me to be like, well, here are your conversational archetypes in text because you already know the full chain. And I think that for you guys, the same has to be true, right? Like with that level of kind of sophistication, it gets easy.
Yeah, it's important to have team members who can do stuff like that. That is outside my realm of patience and expertise. I am highly focused on the strategic use of what to say and what to ask and how to sound in conversations with people who are motivated. That's one of the powers of going to meetups and joining an organization is that not everyone is good at the same type of thing. And so if you can get someone who's got the data in process, or like you're getting advice from like a group, like, the coaching stuff that you could maybe get from launch control, I have no idea, but like you can get guidance on the data stuff, it frees you to focus on what you want to do. Or if you're like me and you want to talk to people, it's all about making sure that you set yourself up to do what is your highest income producing activity. I'm constantly pushing it back against like, I mean, I have an executive assistant and I need it because otherwise stuff falls through the cracks. Like I want to spend as little time looking at email and systems as possible. I know it's important. It's so important. It's just not my thing. So yeah, you're touching on the types of things that where if you can set yourself up to have the right type of competitive advantage, that's huge.
Yeah, and like the one thing that I would maybe add to that is I think that I say outsource everything, right? Like if you can outsource your text engagement to launch control through launch leads and let us just tee up the phone conversations for you, definitely do that.
Yeah.
If you can outsource on a fractional level some of your financial work that you need to do and putting money aside for taxes and all of that, which in itself is a job, do it. Outsource that for sure. But as the business owner, the one thing that you need to be very cognizant of is you're the only one that knows all of the puzzle pieces. So
Yeah.
you have to be able to see what the connection points are between those puzzle pieces. So a very clear example, right? If you're going to take your sales training and you're going to work with Close More Sales and you're going to gain all these incredible insights into how to navigate seller conversations, how to eke out more margins with your dispo conversations, and you're going to apply that to your sales team, but you're not going to use any of that wisdom in your text engagement, or communicate that to the team that you're outsourcing that to, you're missing a massive opportunity. There needs to be a through line with certain things, especially with engagement, that allows you to be putting up, to use marketing terms, the same voice and tone throughout the entire client life cycle, right? And so you have to be the one that goes, hey, you know what? I've gotten gold from Steve and Ian. Hey, launch control, could you guys use some of this, right? Like, we need, if you give us that, we can help implement it, but you have to connect the pieces.
The business owner should be spending probably as much time as possible on where the puzzle pieces connect and outsourcing the piece itself as best they can. You're exactly right. And that, it is truly one of the biggest, for smaller organizations, the biggest challenge I see is in their sales process is a mismatch of marketing for how their sales process runs. And so if you
Yeah.
can be cognizant of making sure there's a through line, so it's a consistent experience, both internally for your team as well as the homeowner and the sellers, the people you're talking to, you will have the best possible chance of success.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be wildly expensive.
No, it
Like,
really
there
doesn't.
there are very inexpensive ways to do it. We had David Richter on recently, and
Mhm.
he talks about profit first, or pay yourself first, right? And has this whole plan on how to do it. And I couldn't agree more, right? If you have a structure in which you pay yourself first, and then from the remainder, you're able to determine, you know, where to outsource, and what can fit into that expense structure. You can figure out ways to do it. Maybe you need to pay, have a simplified CRM so that you can afford to really dive in with Close More Sales, at least for, a 6 to 12 month period, right? Good, do that, right? If you want to outsource all of your text engagement to launch leads, and that means that you need to hire someone a bit cheaper to manage social media for you, cool. But as long as you've paid yourself first, and you have that remainder left to figure out how to outsource, so that you can focus all of your time on seller conversations and dispo conversations,
Yeah,
and just watch the money go up, then you're in a really, really good spot.
I completely agree. Yeah.
So for people that want to, actually, one more question before we get to the for people that want to work with you thing. I know that you guys work with a ton of people in the REI business. Let's go over just a quick success story of someone or a solo entrepreneur or team you've worked with recently, and kind of a turnaround that you guys have helped them achieve.
We are dealing with a lot of different people because, so mostly Steve's focus is on training whole teams. That's most of what he
Mhm.
does. And my time is spent focusing more on individuals or very small teams. Like I will train a team of like 2 or 3 kind of thing, while Steve's training someone, they've got a team of like 5+ sometimes. So the success stories that I've seen in terms of what I'm seeing make a lot of sense are people who come in, and one of the biggest, we've already talked about this, the challenge is that there's this mismatch between how the conversation is starting and then how it should actually continue. So I'll give you an example. There was someone I was coaching. I blank on the name of the company. I know his name is Tyler. I'm blanking on the company because he always shows up as Tyler. It's like a small sort of 2-3 person team, and they were outsourcing their marketing. And it was they were, I believe it was not texting or pay-per-click. They were doing like direct mail. And one of
Mhm.
the challenges they had in their direct mail is they were so oriented around like giving a high offer. So they had this huge amount of people raising their hand for a cash offer. And we had like, that's not how they did stuff. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
with the way they'd outsourced their marketing, they weren't able to like shut off their marketing and change their marketing right away. So we had to make sure that they had a sales process that dealt with this substandard approach of why people are raising their hand. And so we coach them through an exact formula of basically being like, that number is preliminary. I would love for it to be that number. That's if everything's perfect. Let me ask you a few more questions so I can determine how close we can get to that number. Because if everything's absolutely spick and span, HGTV ready, we might be able to get pretty close. I'm not sure yet. Let me learn a little bit more about you. Are you opposed to me asking some questions so I can determine kind of how close to that number we can even get? And that alone, which sounds like such a minor thing, but implemented consistently, conversation after conversation, they got rid of what I'm sure a lot of people who may be listening to this are getting right now, which is someone picks up the phone. Yeah, what's your offer? Okay, well, I saw this much. Like, can you pay me that or not? And that's how most people are experiencing homeowner conversations. And they were experiencing it to the max because of people who were raising their hand wanting a number. And so we gave them a talk track to reorient the conversation around, maybe we can get to that number. I'm going to have to ask questions first to see if I can. Are you opposed to me going deep to see how close we can get? And it just sounds so minor, but it made a massive shift. And I think they told us, I forget the exact numbers. It was something like the first 2 months, an extra like 40 to 60,000 on a couple deals.
Oh,
things
wow.
that just, they never would have gotten through if they hadn't just fixed that initial point of conversation, because there was a friction for how they wanted to run their process and how their marketing was set up.
Yeah, no, that's a great example of pivoting based on a specific need, like responding to a marketing problem, but also going to be in what you explained. There's certain little nuances that working with you guys will really help people with. Like, I brought this up when Steve was on the show, but you said, something like, would it be okay if I ask you a few more questions about the property, or would it be a bother, basically?
Are you opposed to it, actually, is what I asked.
Are you opposed? Right?
They get to say no to give me permission.
Exactly. And that little pause point where they're verbally giving permission. So now it's in their head, well, I said that he could do this. I said he could ask me these questions. Instead of someone saying, well, that's kind of the HGTV number. Hopefully we can get there. When was the roof last repaired? And what's your blah 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 blah? And the person's now like
annoyed. They're frustrated.
Annoyed. They're frustrated. They're like, you sent me this false advertising, like, that, because you didn't give them a moment to opt into the conversation, right? Like, to use text expression, like, we want people to opt into the conversation, to say, yes, like, I do want this communication. Yes, I do want this conversation. And that little nuance can make a very, very big difference in the end point of the conversation.
We've got about 50 things like that. One of the most important things I teach everyone whenever talking to anyone, if money is on the line, get permission and embrace silence. Embrace silence and get permission. And you can get permission through having say no, having them say yes, but getting permission is key, because not only does it buy you time and goodwill, it also, if they go like, no, I don't want to do that, it saves you time for someone you're like, you was never going to be a thing anyway. Because if they're not willing to give you permission to answer questions about their property in pursuit of the number that they responded to, then this is never going to be a deal anyway. And as business owners, as salespeople, the way we make our money is being efficient with our time and talking to people who are worthy of it. Other people also, they might get permission, but they didn't even do the other nuance, which is I gave a reason after getting permission. Are you opposed to me asking a few more questions about your property and your circumstances so that I can see how close to that number we can get? So many people might just go, are you opposed to me asking you some questions? And they think that's getting permission. But like, the brain of the homeowner goes, well, about what? And so as long as I can answer the questions that pop up in their mind internally in the way I'm asking questions, it makes sure that the conversation continues smoothly. And so many people are they're just hitting friction point after friction point in their conversations. And they think, I got permission. I said, can I ask you questions? But they didn't phrase it so they could say it no. They didn't give a context or a reason. And so it's all these little nuances that stack over the course of 100 conversations and 45 minutes of talking to each people when it's time to actually determine if we can buy the home, that if you do this right, can be the difference of not just like 1 or 2 more deals a month, but hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And it's sometimes it's minor adjustments. You have your systems in place. What you're missing are the best practices around these conversations so that people feel like they are in control when you are asking them questions and they want to do business with you, rather than feeling forced into some other TTP like script about whether or not they want to sell their home. And it's the emotional experience of the seller is completely different if you do this right.
Yeah, and those things are all teachable and scalable. If you really get that
Every
down, you can
single
learn
thing is
to listen
teachable.
for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right.
You said, was it embrace the silence?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah,
the expression?
silence is your
Embrace the
friend.
silence because it equals contemplation and consideration? Is that why you're embracing the silence?
A couple reasons. One is most salespeople, either through the way they're trained in the past, or just because they're on a dialer, or so they're nervous around silence because they don't know if they lost connection. They want to fill silence all the time, but silence is a natural thing in conversation all the time anyway. It's only salespeople that hate silence, and so you differentiate yourself by letting people think. Another thing is, especially at the start of the call, elongating that time where they have to answer the question. There's a lot of data points that if you can get someone over 60 seconds on a call anyway, they're less likely to want to hang up on you. And you know this, everyone knows this in their own life. I've been talking to someone about insurance and I realized like 8 minutes in, oh, I don't want this quote, but I can't just go click. I just can't hang up because it's a human being on the line now because we've been talking for 8 minutes.
Yeah.
By even extending the time, you become a human being on the phone instead of an annoying voice that could be calling from anywhere.
Yeah.
And then principally that you're giving them space to not feel pressured and think and decide for themselves if they want to give you the permission to continue on. And when they give you that permission, then you've bought more time to ask deeper questions, to go farther into their why, to figure out more about what's important to them. By just doing some minor things that's like 3 seconds up front, you've bought yourself 30 minutes if you do it right.
Awesome. Well, I'm 100% convinced. What should the listeners, if they want to work with your team, what's the process?
There's a couple ways. One of the things that I always like to say, I say it on the CloseMoreSales CloseMoreSales podcast, it's called, is if they want to text close, CLOSE, to 33777, one of the things we're happy to do is just have a conversation with you to see if there's a way we can help you. A lot of people get on guard around that because we're like a sales organization. They think we're going to pressure you into stuff, and now we're going to be calling you all the time and seeing what that would look like. But that is not how we run our process. Not everyone qualifies to want to work with us. I've just launched a new program called Advanced Sales Mastery that's mostly focused on taking people from good to great. I've created a very real challenge for myself because most people think they're already good enough at sales to qualify for Advanced Sales Mastery, but all those little nuances where they're creating little friction points where they don't need to are something that I want to make sure. I believe salespeople are they are the drivers of economic forces. They are the athletes of the business world. I love salespeople, even though society hates them. And I want to make sure they are empowered, whether or not they're an entrepreneur who's doing the selling themselves or they're a salesperson at a company, that they are doing everything in their power and following best practices to make the most money and help the most amount of people and solve the most amount of problems. So that's a program that I'm happy to have a conversation with to see if they want to get into. Other than that, just CloseMoreSales.com. We've got a book there. There's plenty of ways you can access us. CloseMoreSales podcast, search it on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, perfect. I really appreciate it. I'm sure we're going to get some comments to get you back on. So we'll be sure to bring you back on in a couple months to go over some of the listener questions and dive a little bit deeper.
I would love to. I love going into listener questions because oftentimes the question that I'll hear a question, I'm like, you're not even asking the right question. They'll say, like,
Yeah.
what am I supposed to say when this? I'm like, you're asking the wrong question. You're oriented around the wrong thing. So I love stuff like that. I love
just
that
always coaching.
doing my best. Yeah, it's been a pleasure,
All
Mark.
right. Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.